Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. Now, here are your hosts, John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
All right, welcome into the show. We have a great one tonight, Brandon. There for a while, that's how I started. I think at least 50% of our shows was just saying we have a great one. Then I realized, that's kind of it's like a little too consistent. Like, I shouldn't just keep saying it, even though they're great shows.
Right.
But it's kind of like, our listeners going to be like, oh, okay,
here we go.
Every show's a great show.
Yeah. Well, the listeners are in for a good show, a real good show, with Mike and Roger. And it's one that's, I think it's one that's really interesting because it's starting to show the evolution of not just sports and the need, the pressure that is now out there to get these decisions right is the same kind of stuff you find in the corporate world, the same kind of stuff. The more data, the better decision can be made. And I think it's interesting.
I love that. I love the way you just put that, because it is so true. It's like, this is the area this is when AI meets college recruiting. It's when it meets all of these decisions that are being made. Is how can, as they talk about, hear Mike say this, of course, here we go. We're talking about Mike and Roger. So Roger Kitchen Jr., the listeners, you all may remember, who's the founder and mental skills coach for Power Mental Performance. Roger's been on here before. Mike Taylor is the co-founder of Agdiago Operations. A really good, athlete assessment. It's more than just an athlete assessment, right, but that's kind of the predominant topic of tonight's show, is the athlete assessment that they have put together to, basically a comprehensive view of an athlete's profile, looking at all their, not only the athletic abilities, but academic standing, learning, agility, all that good stuff. But Mike is somebody who's worked in the sports industry for more than 20 years, held leadership roles working with college coaches. He references his time with American Football Coaches Association, the foundation, and then also other sports like, United States Olympic Committee, NASCAR, ESPN. Ever heard of any of those three? So lots of different things going on. And then, of course, Roger Kitchen Jr. has been, working with a lot of Hampton-Sydney's a basketball program up in Virginia that he's done a lot of great stuff with. We had Coach Kimbrough on from that school. So lots of good stuff. But just having these two on the show tonight, and Mike being able to talk about kind of what was the genesis of Agdiago, and why this assessment was developed. Really wanting to be mindful of the coaches and how much time they were spending out on the recruiting trail, and not really being able to spend as much time coaching, doing the things that they're really hired to do. And then it was also interesting to get Roger's perspective from that mental performance aspect of it as well. So it was really good, I think, combination of the two things.
No, it was definitely a good marriage between the two of them in terms of the perspective and application of what Mike and his team have put together. So absolutely.
Well, you know what I'm getting ready to say. Get that pen and paper ready, because here is Mike Taylor and Roger Kitchen Jr. Roger, welcome back to the show. And Mike, welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. We're certainly glad and thrilled that you guys took the time to join us this evening. Really appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and appreciate the invitation to spend time with you this evening.
Yeah, for sure. Good to be back.
Absolutely. Well, as we talked about there in the introduction, and Mike, why don't we go ahead and start out with you? Agdiago, co-founder of Agdiago. I believe I've got this correct, that it's Al McKellar that is the other co-founder, or is it a group of people? How did that work out?
It's a group of people. Paul Saleh is a co-founder. Okay. And so, a group of people that came together. Paul and I were working on this. I recruited Paul to be on the board of the American Football Coaches Foundation. Probably 14 years ago. And we were bringing leadership together at that point, but I had heard culture in all those meetings with all these coaches at the American Football Coaches Association. But it became very apparent that culture was a ghost. People were chasing it, but they really weren't catching it. And if they caught it, sometimes they didn't even know they had it. Just right. It was, you get with that. And I watched some great coaches, as things changed within the game, really get taken up by the speed of the game, and then the speed of recruiting, the speed of trying to find right fit players. Transfer portal doesn't help. All these things, NIL, and the landscape is changing at a rapid rate in football, particularly. And since that was where we were, Paul and I, but it was a serendipitous thing of how this all came about. So,
well, and I'm glad you said that about culture, and the fact that some people don't even realize they have it when they haven't. Some people, it might be fleeting, right? Because I think about this, you think about even some of the great championship teams we think about in college football, for example, is maybe they have it there for 3 or 4 years or 5 years or whatever. But culture is one of those things I think is so dependent on players that because they're in a cycle, why would we think anything different about culture being in a cycle, right?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, and it's a situation where you can have it and you used to have it longer because you had your players. You knew you'd have them for 4 years. Right. Or maybe even 5. But here, people can just jump ship whenever they choose at this point. So what you have today is isn't what you're going to definitely, necessarily have tomorrow. And so culture comes obviously with consistency. It comes with replication. When you're consistent in getting your players, you go, man, I really like the way he looks size wise, the physical attributes, the athletic attributes. And we put all that together, and then you take what's under the hood and then you go, this player is, he reminds me of John. Well, then we start to look at all the data points. It's like, he's really checking all the boxes like John. So this might be John 2.0. And, right. And then you start to replicate. And that's where I always say this, we want coaches to do what they do best. When we're talking about football coaches in this situation, we want them to do what they do best, and that's coach. But they spend so much time trying to find the right fit players that it's hard for them to, as their quest is out there to find the right fit players, they spend more time trying to find those than they do coaching them, and they hope they're getting the right fit player. And then when they don't, then the fans get a little edgy, the boosters get edgy, and then we have major buyouts like we've seen already this week.
No question.
And John, one other piece.
Yeah, go ahead, Roger.
One other piece on that culture aspect is coaching staff. So they're more transient too. So coaches move around a lot. More openings, more vacancies, and kind of your coach. It used to be back in the day, we date ourselves. You had one coach who was there a long time and had the same assistants for a very long time. So culture, an assumption would be you could maintain it easily because you had the same people year in, year out at the leadership levels. But now coaches move around a lot. Head coaches, there's no success quickly, they're gone, and then their coaches leave. So there's the coaching carousel too that impacts that culture dynamic as well.
And one thing on that is, coaching, is one industry where you can get fired for winning and losing. So you're high-fiving in the middle of the season because you're 8-0 or 7-0. And by December, as an assistant coach, particularly, you're looking for a job because your head coach is taking another job and he's not taking you with him. So, right. Here you were, man, we're doing great. And all of a sudden it's like, holy cow, I'm looking for a job. and you're on the phones going, "Hey, buddy, if there's ever an opening, let me know." And it's a hard job. I mean, it comes with a lot of glamour. We see it, but it comes with some high pay, but that's not also fair to the players who play. So it's trying to find. There's a lot of voices out there telling, parents and even high school coaches, that, hey, your son should go here, your son should go here, and in that whole situation, it doesn't. This whole landscape is changing because the portal has so many players in it that all these high school recruits are getting pushed to the other, FCS, Division III, Division II, and there's nothing wrong with that, but because it's changing that game and that landscape as well.
I'll go ahead, Brandon.
I was going to say, it's real interesting that you bring that up, Mike, because I was actually having this conversation over the weekend with my father about just kind of what I thought where it was kind of headed. And to that point, I've got a son that's a sophomore in high school. He'd like to go play at the next level. He's got teammates that are trying to go play at the next level. And it's interesting to hear just kind of what coaches are looking for now. And to your point, coaches, because they're not given a whole lot of runway from boosters and fans and everything, they can't really afford to see or to miss a recruiting cycle. So what you're providing to them is a lifeline almost, that because they have to have that right fit kid. Because Let's be honest, there's probably, it's going to get to a point, if it stays the way that it is, in my opinion, you're only going to have about 500 kids that are truly being recruited out of high school. Everyone else is going to have to go find a home. And if they play and they prove themselves and they give enough film, they can maybe transfer into a bigger school. But I almost see this turning into almost like a farm system.
It really would be that kind of, I mean, that's where it's headed, 100%. I still think at some point when the money keeps growing in the NIL side, I still think there's a day where the NFL gets back and says, whoa, you're getting a little too close. And that's going to be an interesting discussion day. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I just foresee it, as this continues to grow into the mega conference, the college football playoff we're seeing all this conference realignment, and it's not going to change. I mean, it's not going to stop. It's going to continue on here, but that just makes for all this chaos, and it's not organized chaos. Unfortunately, it's just chaos that coaches are trying to catch as catch can, and they're trying to keep their team together. They're trying to, they're starting to be CEOs of their fundraising, their NIL stuff, all these different variables that are changing. And it's like, when do you get to coach football? And when do these young men, and women too. I mean, some of these, we're seeing women in the game too. When do we get to develop those young people? Because the game has such an impact. We all know that. Right. And there's so many positives of that impact in the livelihoods later on that, it's one of those things where I think it's somewhere we have to find a handle to grab onto and keep some consistency and get grounded. And we hope that we can bring that, by at least quickly and efficiently understanding your players, but also looking at them. Like I said, we look at it from a physical aspect, an athletic aspect, and then take that full view of what they are, as a person as well, and put that all together and see, okay, these are the right fit kind of guys for your program.
Yeah, I like what you said. You were quoted in an article a couple years ago. I think it might have been last year. You were talking about the STAR system is not a perfect system by any means. We look at what's between the ears and behind the chest. I thought that was a really good way of looking at that, because everybody is out there identifying those players, and everybody has had those swing and misses, like Brandon was just talking about earlier. And if you think about it now, as you were just talking about just coaches losing their jobs, I mean, these are wagers basically that these coaches are putting on these 18 to 21-year-old kids, where it's like, whatever my salary is, that's what I'm pushing in the table. and it's all behind you, brother. Like if you pan out for us, that's really good. But if it doesn't, and we may know that you're going to pan out for us physically, maybe you're going to be one of those players. But at the same time, if we miss on that culture, or not the culture piece, but if we miss on some of these intangibles, the things you can't see, now that's a culture killer, right? Now that's one player can come in. And that's what I think about. It was honestly, when everybody was talking about Deion in Colorado, it was the one thing that I thought about was not, can Deion Sanders, being the charismatic character that he is he going to be able to attract and be that magnet to Colorado that we know he will be? Absolutely. But is he going to be able to find that blend of players who are all going to be able to interlock and make this, kind of blend together, get them on the right seats of the bus and all of that to be effective? That's the challenge, because now all of a sudden all these different characters are coming together, and we know they can play, but can they get along and do it at the same time?
Yeah, and athleticism is one thing. I mean, we've all seen, like we talk about with the star system. And again, I think the star system is great to a degree, but it's looking at athleticism and it's looking at the physical side. Like I said, we take that heavily into consideration. I mean, but when you look at the other side of that from under what's under that, in that, between the ears and behind the chest, that's where you start to see guys that are they're just different. And
right.
And you when you put all those things together and we start tracking that, you have more than a star system. You have something you can build on. I look at one player that didn't probably get a lot of the notoriety coming out of high school, was a guy, EJ Warner. And the last name is because his dad's Kurt,
Wow.
and EJ is a quarterback at Temple. Now, physically, he didn't fit the prototype. I mean, he did, because he looks like Bryce Young height wise. He looks like Russell Wilson height wise. He looks like Drew Brees height wise, but that's not the in thing right now. But it was, we knew that athletically he was strong. Physically, maybe people weren't there, but we knew the whole package after looking at the all of his intangibles. He went out. He was a freshman All-American at Temple.
Right.
He's doing great this year as well. But it's understanding that there's more to this player. That there's more beyond the athlete. The player beyond the athlete. So,
Mike, take me back if you would, because there are so many deep dives I want to take into this thing. But before we get there, I just think for the listeners, I'd like to orient them a little bit about how this came to be, what Ag-Diago, what was the kind of genesis to that, and then what you all are doing with this assessment, because I love kind of where it's going, and maybe we'll even get into some of the traits and all that good stuff. But just if we would start with maybe what started this ball rolling.
Like I said, working with the AFCA and being involved and being in these meetings, watching these coaches, in and out, and coaches I just respected so much. And seeing them that they were frustrated, and then they'd get on the podium and get a new job and talk about, we're going to find, whatever, Wildcat, players, and we're not just going to be conference champions. We're not going to win games. We're going to win conferences. We're going to vie for a national champion. They say everything. Oh, yeah. And then they walk away from that and they talk about, we're going to build our culture. And I just, you keep hearing that word, and I'm like, it's that word is, I know they mean it, but I just don't know if they know the pathway to find it. And so it was like, could we ever do that? And we worked with some folks to, and the great thing was having the contacts on that deep dive, having the contacts that we did. We were able to talk to coaches and say, this is what we're trying to do. So we need your players, because we want to assess them to build an assessment. And we did that. But we had to do it in a short period of time, because the NCAA only allows you to have their time for so long. So
right.
We had to make it as quick, but as efficient and effective and accurate as we could. And so it took about 2.5 years of research and development of, will this work? and it was you know, we had a couple of players that we did in the beginning that had one had, you know, more than 20 offers, Division I offers. And, you know, physically and athletically, he did well. But then when we assessed him, that brought the whole scope of the score really lower, to a point where it's like, he shouldn't have 20 Division I offers. And I called his high school coach that night, because I thought, here we've done 2.5 years of data or research and development, and here's our first guys out of the box. So we're just testing, and this is not, it's done, it's over, you know.
Right.
And that high school coach said, "Oh my gosh, how do you know that?" He goes, "I could never talk about things." He goes, "If you want him to get things done," he goes, "his work ethic," he goes, "he's a natural athlete, but I don't know how it's going to translate to the next level." He just played, like, this year is the first season he's played, and it's his 5th season that he's played. Wow. And this is the first season he's actually played. But he got with the right coach, and the coach took him under his wing and took all those attributes of physical and athletic, but started to tap into some of his areas of strength that he responded well to. And now we're seeing, you know, heavy improvement. And that's the kind of thing you want to see, is you want to see that development, because I mean, they're lucky. Not everybody has that much time, you know, to spend on a young player like that. But in this case, it's really fortunate to do that. But yeah, there's a million stories like that for us.
So Mike and Roger as well, because I know, Roger, you're dealing with coaches and athletes. Is there, so culture is going to vary, right, based upon the coach and the program and all of it. But do you see one single common thread that they are all, when they look at that assessment, is there one thing that is like, just jumps out at them? Because I love what you said. I read that article that I think was Notre Dame was talking about, you know, yes, we have to love them physically, like all the tangible stuff that you can see, they have to fit that profile. But is there something either through that assessment, or Roger, when you're dealing with people, that they go, look, if this is absent, we just can't live without it? Or
yeah, Mike and I talk about this a lot, and I know what Mike's going to say. I'm about 99% sure, but let's talk about the traits. So it assesses 5 traits. It looks at competitiveness, work ethic, persistence, which we call grit, looks at your team orientation, and then it looks at something called mastery. So mastery is kind of like your IQ for the sport, as well as like a hunger, thirst for learning, like wanting more knowledge. So guys that read the playbook, watch a lot of film, like, are just, you know, it can even get into how do I get better from a skill development perspective. So it's a lot of research and practice around that. But of those 5 dimensions, persistence, what we call grit, is usually the one that stands out. Like, if they don't have that, it's going to be really hard for them to be successful at that sport. And learning from Mike, we see kids assess super high, and like they'll do really well, like 3 of 5 dimensions. We'll see kids assess, they may have a lower score, but like if that grit's there, and even work ethic, even though the score's a little bit lower, like that's really hard to come by. So like if you get a kid that has a strong work ethic, scores well there, and either is like right on the benchmark for persistence or grit, or over it, like you can work with that kid. And the nice thing about these traits too is there's a little nature and nurture in there. So like naturally some are just wired a certain way, but like they're all learnable skills. Like you can coach a kid towards developing team orientation. You can coach them towards, mastery, learning IQ. I've got a relative, he's playing football, high school level out in the state of Washington. And I asked Mike, I'm like, Mike, you run him through for me? He goes, yeah, I've run him through. He's a junior playing exceptionally well. He's all conference for his high school team, leads the team in sacks, plays both ways. His work ethic was just a little low, but he scored really well other places. So like I developed a plan for him and said, hey, here's some things that you can do to improve your work ethic. And this is what work ethic looks like at a very high level in high school, as well as when you transition to college. These are expectations around work ethic. And he's like, Uncle Roger, I got it. And so now I developed a plan for him to work on that. So the dimensions and those traits are learnable, they're coachable, and you can improve in those areas. So I'm curious to hear what Mike's got to say.
Well, first off, you're spot on with grit, persistence. That's the one. But it's also the situation where, when it takes a while for these to change. If you're going to say, gosh, my work ethic has to, and we get this with coaches a lot. We're like, okay, because what we want to do is a coaching style. Like if you're a fiery coach and so you're challenging your player, there's a lot of passion in the game. I mean, we all know that. So coach comes off, or, let's just take a quarterback position, for instance. Quarterback comes off the field and has just made a mistake, and a coach is like, what was that? And obviously I'm really
downplaying it.
Yeah, downplaying that, because we can have some colorful language on that.
What was that, young man?
Maybe a little
with a lot
higher
of beeps
intensity
in the middle, right, Brandon?
That's it.
Beep. What's
you got
that?
It.
But you have someone who might be lower in grit. They're having a harder time flushing that and getting over the adversity. Now, their athleticism, that's why we start to look at all these other data points that we start to say, hey, these young men, this athlete can overcome that. It just may take him a little bit longer. Or if they're high in grit, they've thrown an interception. They don't even care that the coach is yelling at them. They don't even care. I mean, they care, but they're already on to the next play. And that's where, that's a harder one. It takes a while. We've seen in our data for those to change, it takes, a year and a half, minimum for those to start changing. So it's not like, man, we're going to, get in here. We're going to, overhaul you in a heartbeat. But, like what we're talking about with work ethic and hard worker are two separate things. Work ethic is all about the structure you create for yourself. Hard worker is when the structure is created for you. And so a coach is like on you all the time to do this. Because we get this all the time. Coach is like, no, he does everything I say. We tell him to do. That's great. But you got to tell him what to do all the time. So you're taking time away from other players to make sure he's getting stuff done that you want him to get done. Now, it's also the reason you coach, because you want to see improvement, development, and so that trajectory going in the right direction. But by the same token, the work ethic side, we see guys that are high work ethic that, they wake up every day and they got to do A through G, where from my standpoint, I knew, I took the assessment myself, and I'm like, as an entrepreneur, I knew I was going to be low in work ethic. Didn't mean I didn't work hard. It just means my structure is all over the board, a lot of times. And so, but those are the things you have to look at, and they do. But it also, you can match coaching styles. So if you see your quarterback going in and he's a little lower in grit, you may need somebody else on the staff, if he makes a mistake, to grab him, get your arm around his neck, and be like, hey, you got this. Get back in there, and then you're really pumping you're pumping air back into him. And then he goes back out there knowing, okay, everybody, I'm forgiven, kind of thing. And, but it is, if they have all the other things, I mean, when you're talking about the athleticism and the physical attributes, all those, and then you put in and you look at that grit being a strength, and that's just, really what they're gravitating toward when their body, on the field, are they, we see offensive linemen, their competitiveness scores aren't that high a lot of times. And it's because they define wins differently. Mm-hmm. They don't look at the scoreboard. They're looking at the guys in front of them, the offensive line. They've got to know, they got to beat their guy. Their wins might be no penalties. They might be, no sacks, 100-yard rusher, what have you. And they know that somebody else is going to score the touchdowns, as long as they do their job. But it's an unselfish looking type person beyond, and beyond that, the physical and athletic traits. I love, there's one guy, if you'll let me hear, there's a guy who's in the NFL right now. His name is Jimmy Morrissey. And I absolutely love the story because physically and athletically he was fine, but he was just I think he was just in a group with everybody else. He had 0 Division I offers. He had 2 half offers to FCS, and he went to, he walked on at Pitt. And he walked on there, and he said the reason he walked on was because he was able to go there because it's in-state cheaper than he could go on the half scholarships to the 1AA schools, So, but by sophomore year he was scholarshiped, and then he became captain. He became All-American, and then he was a 7th round pick by the Raiders. And his assessment was off the charts, and he just had everything, and he's highly competitive as well. Highly, highly competitive. So when you get an offensive lineman who also is competitive, we've also seen that that's a little bit of a bad man factor, in that regard. Jimmy now is with the Houston Texans, and he's just plugging along. I think he's in his 3rd year in the NFL, and he and I have had conversations. And it's just fun. He's so competitive, though, that I'm like, you have to be careful. Like, you want to win board games against your fiance, right. And he actually put me on speakerphone with her and said, you got to hear this. And so it's fun but it's just allowing them to understand themselves a little bit better too, and the ways they should be coached. And it's all about development and making people better.
There's something really interesting, though, that I just heard you say, though, Mike, was it takes a year and a half to kind of change. So all these assessments are snapshots, right, at the time. And then you hope that you get with the right team, coach, culture, and they develop. But going back to what we were saying earlier, are kids even allowing themselves to have that year and a half to change? I mean, is it just a vicious cycle?
I really think that it isn't. I think that the coaches are able to pinpoint a little bit more, be more accurate, because one size doesn't fit all. That's where culture gets off the rails, I think, is that one size doesn't fit all. You've got to coach guys differently. Some guys can take the heat. Other guys need to know you care, before they care, what you know. And then you've got the team orientation side where guys are, he might be the glue that's holding the team together, on one side, and you need that guy. He may not be the greatest football player on the field, but the sideline factor and the locker room factor, and you start to go, and that's when the whole idea is, again, looking at somebody going, he reminds me of John, or he reminds me of Roger, or he reminds me of Brandon, and looking at everybody's different. And it's like, man, we wish we could have, 5 more Brandons. Okay, well, what's that look like? And then you kind of go, another guy like Mike doesn't really fit our culture. He's not a bad guy. He's just not our culture, and then you can you can work smarter, and you work faster. You're going to work hard as a coach. And that's what we want to do. You have 2 commodities, time and money, and we're trying to save them both.
Exactly. So when you go in, Mike, and you start with a program, for example, because I know there's like a few different things that, there's the athlete fit, there's the team culture profile, the athlete corner. Do you guys start with like the team culture profile first before you start with the athlete fit? Because you almost want to know, like, what's the bus look like that we're trying to get everybody on, right?
100%. You want to look and go, put our pins in the map and say, this is what's working for us really well. And we wish we had more, but what's going on in these other pockets? Can we maximize that potential right now? What can we do to help them? So you start to put that in, and then you start saying, okay, but moving forward, we're going to start recruiting guys that look more like this group. And so as you're finding out what you want and what you like and what your culture really is, that's when you can move quickly. You can be a lot more nimble. We see teams, the portal is the thing that we're, is the enemy right now, because it's speed dating. These coaches are looking at, hey, we need a receiver. We need another quarterback in our room. Hey, this, Power 5 school has one, and this kid, he wants to leave. Well, it's like, okay, they just jump at him, but they like him physically and athletically, or they like him athletically. They're compromising, but they're taking somebody before the music stops. And that's where a lot of trouble, I think, is happening right now. This coaching carousel that always happens this time of year has already begun to spin. And I believe in the coming weeks here, it's going to spin fast and spit out a lot, because there's great coaches out there who are just going to, but it's what you've done for us lately. So, I mean, this society. That's
exactly
now,
right. I mean, I think with the portal, you just nailed it on the head. It has sped up that tolerance. I mean, the tolerance wasn't very high for fan bases anyhow, right? But it's even escalated that tremendously, because now it's like, well, look at so-and-so. They were able to do it with the portal, and we should be able to do it as well. And they don't look at any of the other things that go into that.
It's funny how people quickly dismiss, like, Alabama. You can always hate on Alabama, I think, but you got to love Alabama. You got to love Nick Saban, especially this year. I mean, if there's 1 year to watch Nick Saban, this is the year, because you want to talk about a guy who recalibrates and just, is really, there's a culture. He's built that there himself. Did that play though when he was with the Dolphins? It didn't. So, right fits for coaches as well, right fits for players, and understanding where they need to be. I mean, it's fun to watch programs that we work with have that same type of that transition and transformation.
How long does it normally take, Mike, that you've seen where, I know one of the things that you talked about was, I've seen this work at, the data transfers to wins. I mean, it correlates to wins. How long does it usually take when you are in with a program, working with them? A couple years to where everything's really kind of clicking together?
We've seen it work within a year. I mean, not like, hey, we started working with you in May, and by June you're, or by, August you're a championship looking team. But in that first year, you start to see the guys, and then you're starting to recruit them. Like I said, the portal has been the one X factor that we've been like, okay, this is even more important. I mean, you're already recruiting practically 365. I mean, there's a dead period in Division 1 and in the divisions there, but for the most part, it's a 365, 24/7 situation. Even by way of you watching film and everybody on Huddle. I mean, nobody puts their bad game on there.
Right.
I mean,
it's always the 3 minutes of unbelievable highlights. Yeah.
So which I know coaches, they go in and say, hey, give me the whole game film for the 2 losses you had this season. And they want to see what those players look like in that regard. But we've seen, like I said, we've seen that when you really jump in and we walk with the coach, the complete buy-in. This isn't just Ed Water, but we also feel like it's pretty darn close if you just pay attention, but if you go old school, I know what a good guy looks like, man.
Yeah. The feel, right. It's like you buy the gut. I think it would probably be very fascinating. And you've probably seen this play itself out, that when you start working with a team that, say, already has success, but they want to get better, always wanting to sharpen the sword. And then the teams that don't have success, when you do that baseline assessment with those teams, I bet you that those teams that are having success, you're probably looking at those assessments for the players and thinking, man, y'all haven't missed by much. Like you got a pretty daggone good core here. And then it's probably pretty obvious to you why those other teams are struggling when you do their baselines, because it's like, wow, you guys are like all over the place right now.
That is 100% the feeling we get. And you look at that, I always call gut instinct experienced guessing, because it's great. Gut instinct. We all like to imagine, we have that sixth sense or seventh or eighth sense, whatever we've got, that we can tell that, that diamond in the rough. I talked with Kurt Warner, and I'm like, thank God Kurt Warner didn't give up on Kurt Warner, because everybody else did, until finally Dick Vermeil said, let's give you a shot, and it turned out that, we should have missed on Kurt Warner. You look at a Cooper Kupp, Cooper Kupp isn't about, he didn't have any Division I offers. And now he's highest paid wide receiver, one of them, Super Bowl MVP. They're great stories. I mean, you look at the guys like Amendola, Tom Brady, obviously, is another easy one to jump to. These are not your, Brock Purdy. These are not your typical, attractive players originally. They were good, but nobody knew it was going to look like this. I'm not saying we would know that out of the gate, but I know darn well we would be able to reveal a lot more that's under the hood, there, and that's what's fun.
And it's one piece.
I want to add something to what Mike said. Yeah, one of the things that the assessment does is it starts taking that guesswork out, which is like you're going by feel and what you see, and maybe the guesswork is out here, but then it brings it down to here. So, when we assessed the Hampton-Sydney basketball team, and we ran the team through the profile and got the results back and sat down with Coach Kimbrough and his staff, they were like, they were like, Roger, did you tell Mike about these guys on our team? And I'm like, haven't said a word. And like, there's things that they're like, this is what I think, this is what I see. And then when the assessment comes along, they're like, it just puts a data to what I think and see. And it does take some of the guesswork out. And I mean, look, you've got other data points you got to look at. But anytime you can speed up the decision making and learn how to coach a kid differently, or learn if a kid's going to be a good fit for your program, or, anything that you can get that starts shrinking that mystical ball of performance. And I like what that article said, like what's between the ears and what's behind the chest.
Yeah. Well, and I love for those listeners out there, go to agdiago.com. I'm telling you guys, if you're a coach, if you're an athletic director, if you're somebody who's just, wanting to close that gap from where your program is to where you guys are wanting to be, and you keep scratching your head as to, you feel like you're getting good players, you feel like you've got all of the right skill sets out there, look and see if there's something you're missing. I mean, that you really can't get, and I love in your, one of the, when you're breaking down like competitiveness, mastery, persistence, and all that, there's little notes in there in the player profile. And I'm going to read one just on mastery and this is the level of detail that I really appreciate, because you explain some of this. It's like, okay, this score might be this, but here's why, or maybe this is something to look out for. And you say about this particular player, will watch film, study his position, and focus on the attention to detail of the game, but needs to be encouraged and challenged by his coaches. It is not something he will likely do on his own. See, that's valuable to a coach, because now I can do something with this, right? Like I know where they are. I'm not going to allow maybe that score is a little bit lower than what some of my other players are, but I know I can work with it.
It's exactly, we talk about the three areas of, it's one thing about collecting the data, and then it's about interpretation of the data. And then it's the implementation of the data. The implementation of the data obviously is the key, but if you've interpreted it the right way, then you can implement it, quickly I look at it too. I mean, I with coaches, and I get a little bit too maybe pie in the sky because I just have such a reverence for the profession. But when coaches, they spend so much time with somebody else's kids, and they spend so much time on the road. It's like, man, if we can buy back one day, let's get one day that you don't have to go on the road because you've already got the right fit guy. Before you left the office, you already loved what he was physically and athletically. We already had all that. And then you threw in the next piece of that circle to bring it down with the assessment. You go, man, this kid is the right fit. We can offer, and I don't need to do another visit to all these other guys because I've got this guy. So we're going to get the commitment now. And now, the other thing is you get to stay and coach the guys that you already have. You get to be with the family you have. These are all the, whether it's the team family or your absolute, kids, home life situation. So to me, every time we can buy back a day, and for the coaches to be where they need to be and do what they need to do best, like we talked about coaching, that to me is that other piece of this that, I think they talk about you spend the first half of your life writing your resume and the last half writing your obituary. And, and that's what we're doing here is really focusing on, what we can do to help make the game better. And it's not about kicking a kid to the curb because we all know flat out, if the kid's not a right fit for this team,
that's right.
It doesn't work anyway. So why are we trying to play this imaginary, have this imaginary dance that we're all going to be, oh, good, I get to go to Alabama or I get to go to, some Power 5 school, whatever, when really the best fit for you might have been a school, Mountain West school, whatever, it's just, a MAC conference school or just a group of 5, what have you.
You could also flip that, Mike. I think as I'm listening to you, I'm also thinking about this from the reverse. The player's perspective is if you're an individual out there who is maybe not already a part of a program and you take one of these assessments, now this helps you from a recruiting process standpoint because you can say, hey, I'm going to need to go find a coach that's like this, that's going to be able to help develop me in these particular areas or lift me in this one area of develop, where I have a weakness or whatever the case may be. So I almost think that can go. There's just so many aspects of this that I think are really important.
Information is obviously power, and when we talk about intelligence, I don't care if you're talking about work or you're talking about military, any type of, extra intelligence is so valuable to making a sound decision and doing the job we need to do, whether that is a player, I hear whatever it is, the distributive property or whatever. It's like, well, your son just beat that guy and he just got an offer to Iowa. So that means your son should get an offer to Iowa. And it's like, that's not how it works. It seems like it should, but it doesn't, or that guy just rejected that guy. So, and he's going to play at Connecticut, so, he should also go to Connecticut. It's like, and I have to talk parents down because I'm like, the dad eye syndrome is real. So, right. We have to temper that a little bit at times, but it is that knowledge of saying, hey, this, your son maybe his strength isn't in the grit area, but he's highly competitive, which is great, but he may need to have somebody who's pumping up his ego, for lack of better terms, more than jumping on his ego.
So what's interesting is you guys are now starting to stretch this beyond football, right? And stretch it into, women's basketball, for example. I know you guys are piloting on something right now. Roger mentioned Coach Kimbrough up there at Hampton-Sydney. Are you, I know you're probably still in the early piece of this, but have you started to see some gender differences as it relates to some of these profiles? Because we know when we've talked to other people who have other assessments, it seems like there are certain things that females tend to be heavier in and males tend to be heavier in, so on and so forth.
It still comes down to grit. It's just, life is about grit. and that's just, we had some guys who were football players, who were, they were Green Berets. And so we assessed them. I said, okay, since you're football, think about your football days, but take the assessment. And it was just, grit, which you'd expect. But I mean, it was just like monsters, but we also had one, and I just did it as a whim. I'm like, I met someone who was a softball player, a former softball player in college, but she's a pretty successful actress on Broadway. And she told me about the 200 no's to get to the yes. And I'm like, would you take the assessment? I said, just forget about football if you see it. Just take it. I want to see what it comes out. And I want to see, because the way she was talking, it was about overcoming adversity and perseverance and all these things, and the never give up attitude. And of course, grit, we know was with her, and so it really comes back down to that. I mean, grit is, when you have grit, I say it all the time, when you have, your strength is grit, you have it. It's just, it's just, it's that simple. It doesn't mean it's over if you don't. It just means hopefully, there's some other areas that prop you up. Otherwise, you're going to have those head scratcher moments when you're a coach, whether that be, whatever sport, going, how come we're not unlocking the potential of this player? And, and we all know too, in recruiting, it's, you've heard the adage, it's not the guys you get or that you don't get that kill you. It's the players you get that don't work out that kill you.
Right.
And, then you throw in gut instinct, then you throw in the transfer, then you go in all these variables that are hitting it. But we have not seen, so far, and we're in the pilot stages of that. So that's a to be continued on that one, but we're not seeing a big gender, the athlete has no gender.
That's true.
So interesting on how we segued into basketball. So I'm going to tell the story if you guys will allow me.
For sure.
So Mike met one of our executives for the company I work with at an industry event. And our executive was really trying to figure out how to assess, like in recruiting talent acquisition employees to come in and work in our industry. And Mike and this exec were just talking about grit and how to assess. And we really want to slow the attrition rate down. There's unique dynamics about the culture of our company that, maybe Mike's assessment could, help us tackle from a recruiting perspective. So one day I'm briefing this exec on a resilience program that I created for the company and launched, and we got on the subject of grit. And he goes, I need you to talk to Mike Taylor from, the Agdiago. And like he butchered the name a couple times and it was kind of funny. But he's like, Agdiago, go talk to Mike Taylor. He made the connection. So, Mike and I sat down, and after a couple meetings, we're like, I don't think this assessment will really work for what we needed in the company I work for. I said, but Mike, I got a question for you. I'm a mental skills coach. This is what I do in college and high school. I'm working with a lot of basketball teams. And I said, I think this assessment will work for basketball. And I don't know if Mike was like, that's a great idea, Roger, or if he's like, yeah, we've been really considering another sport and basketball is one of them. But anyway, I said, I got a couple teams that if you're willing to assess just to see if this will work, let's do. And he goes, yeah, man, let's do it. So we ended up assessing a couple teams. Any coaches listening in college basketball, we need your team. We're building a database to validate our data and our assumptions. But I'm telling you what the leading indicators that we're seeing when we sit down with these coaches and teams and we give them their results, they're like, this is amazing. And like they're letting us do their recruits. So like when, as they get kids they're considering for college basketball, we'll give that, they'll send, Mike will send them through that assessment. And we're starting to see those 5 dimensions when they pop up in basketball and you get a kid that scores really well, like it's special. So we know and are getting a really good feel that this, at some point, once we collect enough data and analyze it, this is going to be a really powerful tool for college basketball coaches and even like high school basketball coaches that have kids that have potential to go play at the next level so that they can assess them. So like even when they have those conversations with the college coaches, they're not going back to the conversation Mike had early on, like, man, this kid isn't assessing well. I know he's got 20 offers, and the high school coach is like, thank you for saying that. You know, The coach now doesn't feel like they have to, I don't want to use the word lie, but like
you're hiding.
Dance around instead of just going, look, we've assessed him. Here's what he looks like, you know, and they have that information they can give to the coach, and it's objective. It's not their opinion or my gut feel, or I've been doing this 20 years and I know what I'm talking about kind of thing. So the segue into college basketball has been really interesting. And I, you know, as we say here in the South, that dog's going to hunt. We need more players to go through the database to analyze the data.
Are you all actively looking for both high school and college, both football and basketball, or are you?
So for the basketball pilot program, you know, that would be separate from football. But for the pilot program, we're looking at college. We're starting with male teams first, and then we'll like what Mike said, to be determined, to be continued on female teams. But then we're kind of selective with the high school recruits for the basketball because they've really got to have potential to play at the next level,
right?
So that the data is legit, you know. And so we want some really elite high school kids.
That's a good point because you could water it down. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was going to say with what Roger was saying with the high school coaches. You know, we've had some high school coaches in football talk about, hey, can we run a few of our guys through because I want to know how I can, you know, what are their strengths? I just need to coach them to those strengths. And also they're getting looks from schools. I want to be able to talk, you know, intelligently, not that they wouldn't anyway, but to those topics, and not to say, hey, this guy's not a hard worker. It's just saying, hey, you know, if you stay out with him, you're going to have better results, and he's going to do what you want him to do. You know, and once that'll start to catch, and that's like what Roger was talking about, where all of a sudden the work ethic, once you start showing them what they need to do, they start seeing the results. The work ethic starts to come into play, and they start doing it themselves. You know, so you kind of jumpstart that engine a little bit. But in this scheme of things, they're in the beginning, the high school coaches, you know, like we're saying, that, you know, they don't mean to lie, you know, but they're not going to say, is he a hard worker? Yeah, he's a great hard worker. You know, they're going to say that. And that's fine because these are young guys. I mean, these are young people and they need that development. So, you know, again, it's not to ever kick anybody to the curb. It's just looking at where these best fits would be. And it's helping people be more realistic as well. You know, from the parental side, you know,
here's a good story about how this assessment has worked so far in basketball. We assessed the basketball team. The coach had a couple guys really score well on grit, that persistence factor. And so I just, you know, I circle back to him. I'm doing, you know, some virtual sessions with him and his team. And just one day I was like, you know, so tell me about, you know, candidly, just be honest. Did the assessment work for you? Did it give you what you needed? How are you using it? You know, we need the really candid feedback. He goes, it's great. He's like, those guys that are scoring higher in persistence, he's like, I've been leaning on them more and getting the results that I need. So, and, you know, not lean on them like all up in their grill, but like he's putting the right amount of pressure in the coaching way, directing good energy and passion to them, but holding them accountable, and they're responding. So, but he wouldn't have had that. He wouldn't have been able to coach them differently had he not run his guys through, you know, the assessment to understand what's happening, you know, between the ears.
I love watching you talk about it, Roger, and Mike smiling because he knows the special sauce. Now, here's the next challenge for either one of you. When you can figure out an assessment for the parent, then you've figured it all out because we're all crazy.
Yeah. Well, they're not going to be sitting with us two schlubs.
No, they're not. No.
That ship might have left the harbor.
Yeah. That's true. That ship is long gone. Hey, I tell you what, though, you know, I kind of teed up the first part of this call by talking about the fact that when I started looking into this, I was just thinking of all these different avenues that you could take. And I almost think as we talk about swing and miss, and I know this is not necessarily going to be some idea you probably not heard of, but more for the listeners, is I almost see this being something that, we talked about how transient some of the coaching profession is right now as far as people moving on, whether by choice or not by choice. But when those search committees come in at the now all of a sudden you're looking for the right guy to come in and take over this team. Mm-hmm. Well, if you have that data, that assessment that's been done on that team, man, oh man, this could be a really powerful tool for you to be able to do almost, reverse in it. I don't know why that was so hard for me to say, reverse engineer it.
Well, you look at Colorado with Deion, we're not working necessarily directly with Deion yet, but in that case, he came in, of course, he just started at ground zero, hey,
right.
Most of you aren't going to be here, and you're just not our guys, and like he said, it may not be everybody's cup of tea, but he's like, look, if words are going to hurt you, if they're going to impact you and influence you in that way, then you're probably not the right guy for my program anyway. Mm-hmm. And, there's people who, they like the Hallmark moment, but I mean, there's a whole channel or there's 5 channels. I don't know. They play Christmas movies on it, all year round, I think, but that's not always how things work. We know that. So right. His candidness, at least so far, has been, to a degree, and in my opinion, a little bit refreshing.
It's refreshing.
That hey, let's just we're all let's just call it what it is, and so, but when we look at how this, we've had baseball umpires, we've had football referees come to us and say, hey, we're interested in this assessment. We've had NHL hockey, come up and say, hey, look, we're interested in this assessment. When you look at the baseball umpires and you look at referees, they're looking at it strictly on the biggest focus is grit as everything else, but it's because will those umpires get influenced by a stadium filled with 70,000 people? Mm-hmm. They make a bad call. Ooh, geez, that's adversity I can't get over. So let me get one back to them and make everybody happy all of a sudden, and those are the types of things that they're looking at right now. We're also very, very conscientious to the one size doesn't fit all. We also have to adapt our assessment to make sure the integrity of everything stays the same. And that's what Roger and I are doing, and watching very closely on this pilot. And it's why it's really cool when it works, when it's working out. And we've been lucky because I shouldn't say we've been lucky. I think it's just the way the science goes, but we have had, great accuracy, with this. And so looking at it, it's fun to help people. I think it's just a natural thing for anybody. And that's really what we're doing, and we love these games so much, these sports so much. And these sports are changing. I'm really kind of fearful about the game of college football right now, just because it's changing so fast. No one knows what's going on. They've got pieces of it that they've got their hands around, but the rest of it is just sliding through their fingers. I just feel like, we're going to see a lot of change here even before the end of the calendar year that probably will make everybody's eyes just, be unbelievably wide open going, okay, now what?
Yeah, exactly.
And then you start saying, okay, all the human factors in this, these young kids who, they see Utah, everybody gets a truck, and and you've got $3 million deals. Quinn Ewers shows up at Texas in an Aston Martin. He's handling it very well, but when you're throwing money like that around early on, that also plays into things. And I think you really have to know your players way better, and to much greater detail than just, is he athletic?
You're spot on. And I mean, there's so many applications of this thing. I think you guys could really take it in a lot of different channels, but I appreciate the fact that you are wanting to keep the integrity of the data. You're wanting to make sure that as you're branching out, you're not branching out just for the sake of branching out, that you're doing it purposefully and it's got some meaning behind it. And I think it's a really, really cool thing. What is next? Where are you on, man? You're doing this pilot. Is there anything else you guys are, as we start to wrap up here, is there anything else that you guys are starting to explore? And by the way, listeners, go to, I guess it's called X now. Brandon, you're always so hip to this. It's not Twitter anymore. It's X. Is that what we're doing?
That's right,
now?
Bud. Catch up. So, yeah, we'll get you a giant
boomer
42-point font, and you can just
So go to X at Agdiago, and then you can also go to agdiago.com. And check that out. But, Mike, what's next on the agenda? Where Roger, same with you. What are you guys going to be doing? What's the next chapter in all of this?
Go ahead, Mike.
Right now, one of the biggest focal points on is me, is us watching the transition between high school to college to the NFL.
Yeah.
And seeing those data points in terms of performance data, how it all blends together. And then it's also bringing in, machine learning with AI, those buzzwords that are going on right now. But, it's doing the same things we're helping coaches do. And that's, we're working faster and smarter. And so changing that technology so that then in return, we can help the coaches by working faster, because as the game speeds up, our data has to speed up. I mean, I'm looking at data points as well. I love some of these companies that are out there that they look at like how fast a guy can stop. It's not the 40 speed, or I hear that, hey, the 40 speed, we want to know the 40 speed of offensive linemen because we can tell the flexibility. If they're sub 540s, you can tell the flexibility in them, which then tells a different story. There's data out there that talks about the longevity of NFL careers for offensive linemen who can run a sub 540. Because you see it at the combine, you're like, why are they running a 40? Who cares what an offensive lineman? But that's why they're doing that. They're looking at that in a different way, but also looking, like I said, it's not so much that a guy can run a 4.340, or a 4.37, whatever it is, as a wide receiver. Too many variables involved with the pass. The pass has to be there. The time for him to throw has to be there. And so he runs down the field. But if you talk about how quickly those transition times on a route, that little piece there, that data factoring in with all the other data points we're looking at, I think there's a bigger monster here. And I think that also falls into that we start looking at those same kind of data points of basketball. Where your cuts are, where your positioning is. I mean, all these different things, and what are the tendencies of, wow, there's some great trends to this data in these areas. And I think those are areas we have not mined. And it's not that we've been neglecting it. It's just that we're finding out that I think there's some great gold there.
That's fascinating. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I'd say with the pilot program we're running for basketball, obviously it's just collecting the data and validating it, and making adjustments within the tool to make sure the data is valid so that when coaches and teams get it, players get it, it's useful, it's actionable, something it's going to help them. The other thing is too, and Mike kind of alluded to it, like with positions. So like, within their football assessment, they can break down, like by position. So pro style quarterback, RPO quarterback, wide receivers, D-backs, linemen, they can break down and crunch the data in a lot of different ways to show you, hey, if you're an offensive lineman, this is like really the ideal profile. So like when we get our data points in basketball, we can do the same thing, like for our number 1 and number 2 point guards. What's a good profile look for each of those positions on the court? Because there's a lot of intangibles, like they're playing both ways, their offense, defense. But, if I'm recruiting a big, I really want to know what the right profile is going to look like to get that big, so that they're going to either, fit my program, my culture, or it's going to teach me how to coach them in a different way. So, that's going to be the interesting thing, that as we get the data come in, we finally get the data set, and then we make a few changes, and then we start, using it broadly. Now we can get those nice profiles per position. That's really going to be a game changer. Like, I was telling a friend of mine about this assessment. He's a high school coach. We've been friends a long time. Has a lot of connections with college coaches, and he's going to try to help me get some teams. I said, I bet once this is all said and done, I said, I'm so confident in the data that I can assess the first 2 rounds of the NBA draft and tell you who's going to make it past 4.5 years, because that's the average right now in the NBA for a player to stay. I said, I could feel it. I said, and I'll tell you who's going to be around, for 4.5 years or not. Wow. So we're a long way away from that, but that's the goal, and that's the usefulness. That the impact is going to be big.
That's incredible, man. I tell you.
I was going to say, on the heels of Roger saying that, we look at the NFL draft right now, and you can sit there and say, whoops, too high. He went too high. That is not, and we're starting to see that, it doesn't mean, it just means the development side, would have been better at a 3rd or 4th round, 4th or 5th round. Good for them. They got the money, but man, there's a lot of pressure that comes with it. And, and they may not be able to handle that. And I do worry about that, with those players, but you can sit, like Roger's saying, and start to predict the draft a little bit. And I'm like, I see the experts, again, I use that term a little loosely and lightly, but you see the experts on the mock drafts, and I find it comical a lot of times.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Gil Brandt, who just passed away with the Cowboys. He was, I'd say if we were doing something, it's close to what he was, it's along those lines.
Well, you guys are, you mentioned Gil Brandt there, but you guys are surrounding yourself with a lot of pretty knowledgeable people. I was looking on that Agdiago advisory board, and there's no chumps there. You're talking R.C. Slocum and, Kevin Murphy, Daniel Knotts, and Grant Teff, who, these are, and that's just a few of them. There's a lot of really strong, not just sports minds, but just minds in general there that are, leaders, great leaders.
That's really it. You talk about the leadership factor, that's what coaching is. You're looking at the great leaders there, and we want to surround ourselves with, if we have to recruit a great team too.
Right, so, exactly.
We'd be a little remiss if we failed on that side of it. But it's great when we have, Roger and I, and Al McKellar and with Paul and a lot of the guys on the advisory board, working together. And we keep adding to that, and there's some folks here that haven't been listed on there yet, and then there's guys that aren't on the advisory board that are just really advisors, that we sit and we talk with, whether they're military leaders, corporate leaders, even household leaders. I shouldn't say even, but it's, leadership is found in so many different places, and just understanding, great coaching. We think of the field, but sometimes it's great coaching can be, it's all, I'm going to go back to Roger. It's all mental performance. So
absolutely. Well, speaking of Roger, I forgot when I was rattling off, I think I got so hung up on the whole X thing that I was so hip that I remembered that I forgot that to mention where to contact you and where to find your information, powermentalperformance.com. And then, of course, on X, I guess it is, at Roger Kitchen Jr. So, gentlemen, we can't thank you enough. I know, these are busy days. Just hearing all the things that you all are doing makes me appreciate even more the fact that you were able to carve out some time for us, and we're humbled by it. So we certainly appreciate it. And best of luck with, everything you guys are doing.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.
Appreciate you guys having us. It's been great.
It was wonderful, and come back whenever you can.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Hey, listen.
Same time.
Hey, you won't see us tomorrow because John will still be trying to figure out Twitter.
Yeah.
This is true. This is true.
Oh,
All the
appreciate you
priorities. Yes. Thank you guys
Thanks,
so much.
guys.
We
You'll have a
appreciate
wonderful evening.
Take
You
care.
too.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.